What role does archaeology play in our understanding of the Bible? One of the movies that captured my imagination as a young boy was Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Spoiler alert! It was fascinating to watch the race between the Nazis and Indiana Jones to find the Ark for its mysterious power. I did not know anything about the Ark until I saw the movie. I did not even know that it even existed or mentioned in the Bible. And I was fascinated and obsessed by it. So I would read a theological dictionary to find out where it might be. Actually, if you read in 1 Samuel chapter 5, this is what it says in the first few verses. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of the Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God." The Philistines tried to take the ark to different cities, but each time the same thing happened. So they eventually returned it back to its original place in Israel. You see, that's what it says. It was just so fascinating to read things about even the Ark of the Lord. Biblical archaeology is more than the speculative movie for some Hollywood movies. It's important to know that there are numerous archaeological evidences that corroborate the claims of the scriptures, and they can be a powerful tool to defend against the critics. It is no secret that the Bible critics have made allegations against the historicity and authenticity of the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, since some of it was written over 3,000 years ago. The critics have discounted it as a redacted document, meaning they allege that the scriptures were edited and compiled from multiple sources at a later time. But the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, were attributed to Moses by Israelites to give him prominence, and that's what they were just alleging. They say that it was not Moses who wrote them. The story of Abraham is a fiction, and all these things. And against such allegations, biblical archaeology can adequately refute their arguments. Before we dive into the specifics, I just want to give you a brief overview of major archaeological periods and world empires of the Bible and how they relate to the Bible. So here we go. The Stone Age to the early Bronze Age, when people started to work with metal, dated up to 2100 BC, would be considered pre-Abrahamic period in the Bible. And the Middle Bronze Age, 2100 to 1500 BC, is the period where Abraham to Moses were active. The Late Bronze Age, 1500 to 1200 BC, is the time of Moses to Judges, where Canaanite conquest and settlement in the Promised Land took place. Then came the Iron Age, generally dated 1200 to 330 BC. It is during this time that the kingdom of Israel was established, divided, and ultimately destroyed. And also there is the Hellenistic period, 330 to 63 BC, where Alexander the Great came to dominate. And that period is when God was silent, in between the Old Testament and the New Testament time. It set the stage for the Greek culture and language to spread throughout the known world. That's why the New Testament was written in Greek, because it was a universal language, and it was important because people of different cultures and regions understood Greek. And the next came the Roman period, going until 330 AD, and it is during this time that the New Testament took place. Because Romans built roads, the gospel spread faster. Paul's missionary journeys and Christians traveling to different regions were possible because of what the Romans have done. Now, I'm not saying that this is the reason, but you can kind of understand why Jesus came when he came when you see the setup of the culture and infrastructure of the time. So when Abraham went down to Egypt, he would have seen the pyramids because they were built before his time. Joseph, as we were talking about in the last few weeks, Joseph would have certainly seen them. Now, when were the superpowers of the known world active? We have heard empires like Assyria and Babylon mentioned in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. But when did they exist? Assyria in Mesopotamia was around 740 to 612 BC. Assyria was the one who had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel around 722 BC. Babylon rose and took over Assyria as the great empire around 612 to 539 BC. And Babylon came and conquered the southern kingdom of Judah around 586 BC. So, there's Babylonian exile is pretty famous because of the book of Daniel. Now, after Babylon, Medo-Persia came to dominate the world around 539 to 331 BC. And it's during the reign of King Darius that the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. And that's what happens, and this is described in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. It was during this Persian dominance that there was the clash between Persia and Greek coalition forces, including the well-known 300 Spartans. During the intertestament time, the Macedonia was prominent, led by Alexander the Great, and the last relevant empire is Roman Empire, as I mentioned before. Now, let's focus more on the archaeological evidence for the antiquity of the Pentateuch. Many Bible critics have focused on their historicity since we are talking about ancient times. When you work with limited evidence and records, it's easy for the critic to raise questions about the authenticity of the Pentateuch. For example, it was assumed that writing was relatively unknown in Palestine during the Mosaic period. Now we are talking about around 1400 BC, and therefore no part of the Pentateuch could have existed in writing until the 10th or 9th century BC, and that's what they were saying. What the critics claimed was that it was different versions of oral traditions that were compiled and edited around 10th or 9th century BC and attributed them to Mosaic authorship to raise national pride since Moses was such a revered figure in Israel. Another allegation is that the reference to the Hittites and other people groups were condemned as mere fiction because there was no extra biblical references outside the Bible. The existence of such a king as Belshazzar in the book of Daniel was considered unlikely because no Greek author had mentioned them, and therefore the biblical record could be presumed to be wrong. And other charges like that were everywhere. However, since then, there have been archaeological discoveries that have confirmed the use of alphabetic writing in the Canaanite-speaking cultures before 1500 BC, as well as documents that show the existence of Hittites and other people groups mentioned in the Bible. They also found the ancient tablets containing the name of Belshazzar. Case after case, recent excavations have vindicated the biblical accounts. One by one, allegations of historical inaccuracy have been quieted. They are the ones that have been proven groundless. Not a single archaeological finding has been found contradictory to the biblical record after these findings. John Elder, and he's a liberal theologian himself, but this is what he said. It is not too much to say that it was the rise of the science of archaeology that broke the deadlock between historians and the Orthodox Christian. Little by little, one city after another, one civilization after another, one culture after another, whose memories were enshrined only in the Bible, were restored to their proper places in ancient history by the studies of archaeologists. Contemporary records of biblical events have been unearthed, and the uniqueness of biblical revelation has been emphasized by contrast and comparison to newly discovered religions of ancient peoples. Nowhere has archaeological discovery refuted the Bible as history. We cannot possibly mention every single discovery. That's beyond the scope of this short presentation. I gave basically a big picture, a broad overview on this topic, but in the next session, we're going to be looking at a couple of well-known and significant archaeological discoveries. So I hope to see you then.